Sexual abuse often causes children extreme emotional and psychological harm. When a child is sexually abused, he or she is robbed of innocence and forced to deal with adult situations years before being developmentally ready. This can cause a victim to have lifelong psychological, sexual, and relationship problems. These emotional effects often get progressively worse if the abuse is allowed to continue and the victim is not afforded the opportunity for counseling and other social services. It's difficult to statistically determine the full effect of sexual abuse on our society. However, it is clear that there is a correlation between sexual abuse and alcohol abuse, drug addiction, prostitution, violent crimes, and suicide. It's truly sad that children often don't tell about sexual abuse and exploitation. If we could get children to tell a teacher, professional caregiver, or other mandated reporter what is happening, then the situation could be reported. And then, if a child could tell the police and Child Protective Services what happened in a confident and credible way, something could be done to stop the abuse. The problem is that children rarely tell, and when a child does say something to a teacher or caregiver, he or she may recant the story when under the pressure of a formal interview. There are many reasons why children don't report abuse. Children are often too young to understand what is happening to them. A child may feel uncomfortable when a parent, sibling, or family friend does something to them, but they may not be able to comprehend the situation. A child may also be afraid to report abuse because the perpetrator has made direct or implied threats. Developmentally, it is natural for children to think that the world revolves around them. So when they are victimized, they might think that it was somehow their fault. Perpetrators often reinforce this guilt by telling their victims that they are the ones who are responsible for the abuse, and suggesting that the child will be the one who gets in trouble if anyone finds out about what has been going on. Sometimes victims don't tell because they don't want to get the perpetrator in trouble. Remember, perpetrators are usually people that the family knows and trusts. Often, they are a beloved family member, someone that even the victim loves, despite what has happened. Victims may even think that they are in love with the perpetrator and resist efforts to help themselves escape the abusive situation. We cringe when we hear stories of sexual abuse, molestation, and exploitation, but unless you are a survivor, you will never be able to understand the unimaginable mental trauma of being victimized. The sooner that abuse can be recognized and stopped, the faster the victim can begin to heal. The good news is that children can be surprisingly resilient, and with the right therapy and a lot of love, a child can regain self-esteem and recover from the emotional and psychological trauma. We won't dwell on why perpetrators do what they do. Their reasoning doesn't make sense, and it really doesn't matter. Suffice it to say that there are plenty of perpetrators out there. They come from all walks of life, all economic situations, and many are trusted and respected citizens. So it is important for you to recognize how they operate. An adult who is sexually attracted to young children is known as a pedophile. Psychologists have defined other types of sex offenders as well. Some only prey on extremely young victims, while others target older children. Some only target victims of the opposite sex, while many choose victims of the same sex or both sexes. It is not uncommon for a sex offender to have many victims, but some only target one or two victims. This is especially true with incest. Although it is hard to believe that a mother or father would sexually abuse their own child, incest is fairly common. The offending parent may openly treat his or her offspring with the affection a husband and wife would typically share. In cases of incest, both parents may be involved, either in the actual abuse or as enablers who refuse to intervene and take action to stop the abuse. Incestuous families tend to be very private. The parents may be vehemently opposed to sex education classes for fear of being exposed, and they may discourage a teenager from dating. While most reported and prosecuted cases of child sexual abuse involve male perpetrators, there may be many more women sex offenders than we currently recognize. Since our society trusts women as caregivers, it is generally easier for female perpetrators to get away with sexual abuse. Because of our society's double standard, boys who are sexually abused by women may not regard these encounters as abusive. But such incidents can distort a young person's natural sexual development and cause them emotional trauma. In some cases, this can even lead the victim to abuse younger children. Megan's Law and posted information on convicted sex offenders living in our communities may seem like a tough stance on sexual abuse. While the information may be helpful, realize that it actually only identifies a small percentage of sex offenders, those who were caught, convicted, released, and made the list. Don't get lured into a false sense of security. It's much more likely for someone you trust to sexually abuse your child. Remember, before they were known criminals, most of these perpetrators were trusted friends, neighbors, and parents. One thing that nearly all sex offenders have in common is that they usually groom their victims' families before abusing the children. The seemingly unselfish acts of kindness can be so effective that even if the abuse is discovered, it is often hard for the victim's family members to believe the allegations. Once a perpetrator has gained a family's trust, he or she will begin to groom the intended victims. Public demonstrations of affection can be an effective grooming technique. It says to the victim, "Look, it's okay what we do. I can do this in public and no one will stop us." Parents often unwittingly fall into the perpetrator's trap. As parents, we want to teach our children to be polite to family and friends. But what we should teach our children is that they have a right to keep their distance if they feel uncomfortable. There is a tremendous amount of power and control associated with sexual abuse, and the ultimate grooming technique is for perpetrators to give their victims privileges and gifts in order to make them feel important. Perpetrators often buy gifts for their intended victims or give them money for no apparent reason. The child learns that by being closer to the perpetrator, she has the power to persuade him to buy her more things. The perpetrator is creating a quid pro quo situation. He is setting the stage to trade gifts for sex. Perpetrators also empower their victims by teaching them to keep secrets from adults. Sex offenders don't want to get caught, so they are usually very careful to only target children who are unlikely to tell, and to test them to make sure that they will keep secrets. Once a perpetrator has gained everyone's trust and ensured that the children will keep secrets, he will introduce his victims to sexual situations, such as playing sexual games, showing them pornographic movies, magazines, or websites, and talking to them about sexual situations. A perpetrator may also orchestrate seemingly accidental encounters, such as walking in on children while they are dressing or using the bathroom, exposing themselves to a child, or touching a child's private parts either over or under the clothing. It's important to note that all of these actions constitute sexual abuse and, if suspected, must be reported. This grooming process may take several months or even years, so recognizing a situation early can prevent the grooming situation from escalating to sexual assault. When abuse is discovered, one thing that many people will tell you is that they did not recognize anything wrong because the perpetrator seemed so nice. If a situation feels too good to be true, it may be. Trust your instincts and always err in favor of protecting the child. As a person who works around children, you are in a unique position to recognize the signs that point to abuse. Is the cut on Bobby's arm from falling off his bike, or is he being physically abused? Is Ellen's old coat and torn jeans a fashion statement, or is it a sign of neglect? How about sexual abuse? How do you recognize something you can't see? Occasionally, there are marks or injuries on a child's body that indicate they may have been sexually abused. A victim may suffer persistent ailments, such as urinary tract infections. They may also have suspicious vaginal or anal discharges, or complain of redness or soreness in their mouth, anal, or vaginal areas. If you notice that a child has a suspicious rash, or complains of an unusual ailment, follow your organization's reporting procedures. Handling a situation that could be abuse is tricky. Parents and guardians must be informed when their child is sick or injured, but you don't always want to let them know that sexual abuse is suspected. If you are unsure about how to handle a situation, ask Child Protective Services what you should tell the parents. When confronted, a perpetrator may have excuses to explain the situation. They may even blame the events on the victim. The important thing is to always contact Child Protective Services if you suspect that a child is being abused. You don't need to have caught the perpetrator in the act, you don't need physical evidence, and you don't need a child to come forward to tell you that they've been abused. All you need is reasonable suspicion that a child might be a victim of abuse. Often a child's behavior is the only indication that something is wrong. A perpetrator can make sure that there is no physical evidence, groom a victim's family into denial, and brainwash a victim not to tell, but they can't force a child to hide the emotional scars. Any kind of abuse is likely to cause a child extreme emotional and psychological harm, but sexual abuse can be particularly devastating to a child's mental well-being. A child's self-esteem may be severely damaged. They may feel alone, isolated, confused, angry, or ashamed. These emotions often bring about recognizable changes in a child's behavior. The three most common behavioral indicators that a child may be a victim of sexual abuse include a child's fearfulness of places, situations, or individuals, a sudden change in a child's behavior or personality, and knowledge of sexual situations beyond a child's developmental age. Any one of these indicators may be enough for you to contact Child Protective Services. Let's take a look at each one of them. As horrible as it is to think about, some children are sexually abused soon after they are born. Babies and toddlers are too young to tell you that something is wrong, but they can show fear. An abused baby or toddler may be afraid of a specific person, such as one of the parents, or they may fear nearly everyone, or certain types of people, such as all older men. Although some small children will cry or try to push away from people that they're scared of, most will become submissive, quiet, distant, and solemn around the people that they fear. They may be unable to maintain eye contact, become stiff when held, and may react violently when their diaper is changed. Sexually abused toddlers may have a delay in their potty training. They may fear going into the bathroom, and they may have trouble sleeping because of reoccurring nightmares and a fear of monsters. Fear is also an important indicator with older children. Children rarely tell about abuse, but they might indicate that they don't like someone or don't want to go to someone's house. Sexual abuse often causes sudden, radical changes in a child's personality. A little boy who was outgoing a week ago may suddenly be withdrawn. Why? What's bothering him? A quiet, innocent little girl may be acting surprisingly outgoing and all grown up. Why? What caused her to change? Children are individuals, and each will react to abuse in his or her own way. Some victims of sexual abuse become withdrawn and isolated. They may rock back and forth, or even curl up in a fetal position and try to hide. Others become uncontrollable and might act out the type of abuse that they are experiencing. They may beat up their stuffed animals, yell insults at their playmates, or act out sexual situations that are years ahead of what they should know. Sexually abused children often have a negative image of their body. Some victims deal with their negative self-image by dressing provocatively and by acting promiscuously. Others will use clothing to try to hide. They may shield themselves under many layers of clothing, have a fear of changing their clothes during gym, or wear unattractive clothing in an effort to desexualize themselves. Sexual abuse typically causes a child to feel a lot of anger. Some children hold this in. Others have uncontrollable outbursts. They lose control of their emotions for no apparent reason, and like someone flipping on and off a switch, they cycle between what appears to be contentment and uncontrollable rage. Sexual abuse victims usually develop depression and may have unexplained recurring ailments such as stomach problems and headaches. They may regress, suck their thumb, forget their potty training, and have trouble with wetting themselves. As victims age, their lives may be marked by developmental delays, and they may have difficulty maintaining close friendships. The trauma that a sexually abused child feels will usually result in less involvement in school activities and poor grades, but this is not always the case. Some victims become model students. They avoid being around abusive situations at home by staying late at school and getting involved in extracurricular activities. They have learned to hide the emotional scars of abuse and to seek out interaction with caring adults like you. The behaviors to look for in these children are overcompliance, an unusual eagerness to please, and a tendency to act superior to other children. Of course, a change in a child's behavior is not necessarily caused by sexual abuse. There may be other things happening in a child's life that is causing the child to act differently. But when you have reasonable suspicion that a child's behavior may be the result of some kind of abuse, request an investigation. Premature knowledge of sexual situations is another indicator. You are well aware that many children have a natural curiosity about their bodies. But have you ever known a child who had an unusual understanding of sex, was obsessed with body parts, or always wanted to play sexual games? Sexually abused children sometimes have no boundaries. These children may cuddle with strangers, pull off their clothing for attention, try to touch other people's private parts, or have other sexualized behaviors. A sexually abused child may also reveal clues to their victimization through drawings, paintings, and other forms of artwork, playing sexual games with stuffed animals, dolls, pets, or other children, foul language and vulgar names for body parts, and statements about sexual situations that they should know little about. Other indicators of sexual abuse include a child who implies that they may have a secret with an adult or older child, indications that they have a new teen or adult friend, and gifts of money or toys from an older friend. While premature knowledge of sexual situations is an important indicator of sexual abuse in younger children, by the time a child reaches his or her teens, it becomes more difficult to recognize sexual abuse. Some adolescent victims will begin to have multiple sexual relationships. Many get involved in drugs and alcohol. Some commit crimes and acts of violence, including self-destructive behavior, self-mutilation, and suicide. Because of these behaviors, we may have a harder time believing teenagers when they make disclosures. Keep in mind that a child's behavioral problems may be the result of some kind of abuse. It is rare for a child or teenager, even a delinquent teenager, to make false accusations of sexual abuse. As a mandated reporter, you must always err in favor of believing a child. You only need to have reasonable suspicion that a child may be a victim of abuse to request an investigation. We've discussed many of the behaviors to look for in both perpetrators and victims of sexual abuse. Many of these same behaviors may be present in other types of abuse. The important thing is that you make sure that Child Protective Services is contacted whenever you have reasonable suspicion that a child may be a victim of abuse. Let's review. Realize that children don't often report abuse and need your help as a mandated reporter to speak for them. Keep in mind that most perpetrators are known and trusted by their victim's family, and many are family members. Look for grooming techniques such as adults who provide children with gifts for no reason or who perform public demonstrations of affection. Be aware of children's fears and take them seriously. A child may have a good reason to be afraid of a certain place or person. Look for sudden changes in behavior and pay attention to clues that a child may have an unusual knowledge of sexual situations for his or her age. And remember, you only need to have reasonable suspicion that a child may be a victim of abuse to request an investigation.